I'm Jonathan, this is Krista, and we are here to help you be a better landlord. All right, Krista, HOAs, Homeowner Associations. I've been hearing a lot about HOAs recently. They're not necessarily a new thing, but I feel like they're more prevalent than ever before. Is that accurate?
You are absolutely correct. There are, I believe, 377,000 HOAs in the United States at the moment. 10 years ago, there were some like 80,000 fewer. So We've been really kicking off. And in fact, I believe it's around 67% of new builds actually end up being part of HOA communities. So super prevalent, really exploding. And a lot of people are curious if they're actually good for property owners or not, especially if you're a landlord.
That's right. Yeah, it can really eat into your cash flow. So let's start with why are there so many more?
Yeah, so there are a lot of different factors coming together to make HOAs more popular. One is going to be that we have an aging population. And so with an HOA comes certain perks and privileges. We'll get into that a little bit later. But for some of our older folks going into housing, they might want someone to take care of the lawn or to take care of the snow shoveling, things of that nature. So there's a drive from a consumer standpoint. Also, with all of these different master planning communities popping up, it's easier to have some kind of organization overseeing everything so that the aesthetic of the neighborhood stays consistent. So those are going to be rules about like your paint colors and how tall things can be in the yard, things of that nature. So with these two factors coming together, plus a shortage of other housing that's just not an HOA community housing, we've seen a definite rise in these organizations across the nation.
Wow, that is a crazy increase. So you've sort of hinted at a few things, but what exactly do HOAs do? What do they provide for the property owners?
So it's going to range pretty wildly depending on where you live, but by and large, HOAs are in charge of maintaining common areas. So any kind of amenities that the property shares. So we're talking like a pool at a condo, or the clubhouse, or workout rooms, things of that nature that is used by everybody. The HOA is usually in charge of maintaining that. They also typically provide services like trash, snow removal, lawn maintenance. They might even provide like roofing assistance, painting, etc. It's going to come down to the individual organization and the amenities that that community offers. By and large, you'll find HOAs with multifamily housing. So condos are usually what comes to mind for people. But as we've talked about, HOAs are more popular than ever, so don't be surprised if you find them attached to single-family homes in a gated community or in other spots that they didn't typically pop up before.
And how much are HOA fees on average?
So on average, it's between $200 and $300 per month. So if there are more amenities, let's say maybe there's a steam room and a first-class gym, you should expect those fees to be higher. The big question, and I'm curious to know what you think, who pays for them? Is it going to be the tenant? Is it going to be the landlord? What would your gut say?
My gut would say the landlord.
Your gut is spot on.
Okay.
The reason for this, so it's not illegal to charge your tenant for the HOA fees. You want to make sure in that case it's spelled out in your lease along with exactly what happens if they don't pay those fees. The reason that most landlords opt to take those on, because if those fees are missed, the HOA can actually foreclose on the house. So that's why instead of having the tenant do it, most landlords just opt to take on that fee. Of course, as we said, it's an average of $200 to $300 per month. So that can really start to eat into your cash flow if you're not paying attention.
Yeah.
And it's not atypical for HOAs to raise their fees regularly.
Wow. Okay. So when somebody is considering buying a new rental property, they should obviously pay attention to, is there an HOA? Yes. How much does the HOA charge? But it sounds like they should be factoring that almost as an extension of their mortgage payment. Is that accurate?
I would say 1,000%. So we'll give you a few tips on what to do when you're considering a property within an HOA. But the biggest one, the key takeaway, make sure you ask them for their charge schedule. That'll show you historically how often the HOA has increased their fees, which can help you determine if this property is going to be worthwhile in the long term. Because if they are regularly increasing fees by 50% every year, suddenly your investment property is a drain on your budget and you're probably going to have to sell it off. So make sure you ask for that. They should be able to give it to you. Also, get involved in your local HOA. insofar as go and attend a meeting. See how they communicate with property owners, because that will help you determine if this is an organization you want to work with or if it's going to prove to be more frustrating than it's worth.
Yeah, HOAs get a bad rap, but I'm sure there are some good ones.
I've heard tell.
So, attending meetings, that sounds like a great way for somebody to figure out, is this community worth it for me to invest in, and especially to pay what might be a pretty hefty HOA fee every month. What about talking to other property owners in that community?
Highly, highly recommend it. Talk to everybody. Even if they're not a landlord, it's good to get a sense of how overbearing the HOA might be, what kind of services they fully provide. Let's say they advertise that they have a trash service, but it only comes once a month and they don't tell you that. That's the kind of inside scoop you can only get from somebody who's experienced the property. So don't be afraid to chat with folks, especially if you do go to attend an HOA meeting.
So I know a lot of HOAs have rules about what you can do with a property that's within their jurisdiction. How does that work for landlords and building out their own lease agreement?
Such a good question. So it's really critical that you evaluate your lease against the HOA rules to make sure that everything goes together nicely. Because if you allow something that the HOA bans, you could end up getting in trouble and being charged a fine or otherwise being asked to leave the community. One common example is the landlord allowing pets, but the HOA community actually doesn't. So just be sure you're reviewing both. If you have questions about any of their terms or clauses, ask before you sign anything. Just as you would expect a tenant to ask you before they sign the lease, make sure you are completely clear on what their rules are before you engage in this kind of contract. Because again, the law is going to follow whichever one is more strict most of the time. And you don't want to have competing ideas that confuse your tenant about what they're allowed to do with the property. So be clear, ask questions, and don't be afraid to have your tenant ask questions as well. They should be aware of the rules. And you'll have to provide those when they are signing the lease too. Keep that in mind.
Absolutely. And in the case that an HOA is providing a lot of good things like snow removal or yard maintenance, is that something that landlords should be putting in their rental listings?
Yes, I would 100% recommend putting those details in your listing. It's so nice for a tenant to know they don't have to worry about that, and that can give you an edge in a competitive market.
All right, so HOAs, good or bad?
Don't go into anything blind. Going into an HOA blind is bad. But if you do your research, ask for their charge history, evaluate your lease against theirs, and make sure that any prospective tenants are aware of their responsibilities, then it could be a great thing where you're getting services for hopefully a manageable monthly payment.
Awesome. Well, thank you for talking through HOAs, the good, the bad, and the ugly. If you out there have any thoughts about HOAs, whether you love them, whether you hate them, please let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe.